layman. So I always look forward to having meaningful conversations with students. The keyword here is conversation. This is not, a lecture where communication is just simply one way. So we hope that through this short lecture, the keyword here is short. I learned my lesson last month where I talked for about 1.5 hours and there was very little conversation. So here, we'll try to make it short and sweet, which is characteristic of a journalism practitioner anyway. So rest assured that we will try our best to just highlight the key points and then let's have this conversation. Because after all, editorial independence at first glance may sound boring, but when you think about it, nothing about this government is ever boring. Okay? So if you want to see a connection between fake news and editorial independence, the reason for this lecture is quite simple because I will highlight the thesis right now. What is the thesis? We are all aware that government is faced with the preponderance of fake news. So many errors in the Philippine News Agency's website. Even the impersonator of the president, his interview got transcribed and it was sent to the media. And it turned out that it was just not really the president talking, but just a simple impersonator. What is the solution to this? The problem of fake news in government can only be solved through editorial independence. It is not through stricter regulation. Of course, training of the government staff and employees can help, but the solution here, as we'll talk about later, is editorial independence. Kumbaga sa pelikulang Frozen, ang tema dapat nila ay let it go. Okay? I hope that's clear now. So, going to the discussion outline, of course, just like in any academic practice, we hope to define first what we mean by editorial independence. Because as a compound noun, parang fake news yan, di ba? Fake news is compound noun composed of fake and news, right? Here, it's more than just a compound noun. It's not just an issue of knowing what an editorial is and what independence is, right? Because even among politicians, they can seem to understand what is meant by independence. Because sometimes they are guilty of puppetry and subservience even to foreign interests. So as far as independence is concerned, we have to really internalize, we have to know how it means, especially in the context of public information in government. So after knowing the definition, we want to have a quick review of the government media organizations under PCOO. We need to do this because most likely, you may only be aware of the government media that are publicly known. But there are those that are not so publicly known because they operate under the radar, or maybe you can say they are so irrelevant that they're not worth knowing about. But here, we want to know what these government media are. And then what are some notes on the Duterte media agenda? We need to also define what the phrase Duterte media agenda means, and we have to also establish how it relates to the issue of editorial independence. And then we have to look at how editorial independence is being pursued in the government media. Without preempting the discussion later on, if you listen carefully to the 2016 State of the Nation address of President Duterte, he did mention editorial independence. So we have to remind ourselves in what context the phrase was used and to see what has been done since 2016, since July 2016 to be specific. Some conclusions may need to be articulated here and then what should be done. So it's not as long and circuitous as we compared to the discussion on the political economy of fake news. So we hope that with this short discussion, we can have a meaningful conversation later on. So that's my expectation to all of you. We have to have a conversation. Okay? But for now, let me just limit my expectation to this. In the next few minutes, in the next 30 minutes or so, my expectation is quite simple. pretend that you're listening. Okay? I hope you can do that. Thank you. So what is editorial independence? So basically, when we talk about editorial independence, it simply means this: the freedom of editors to do what they want, of course, subject to the normative standards of journalism. When I say do anything you want, it's not absolute. Because basically, there should be no interference from owners. So that is the general definition of editorial independence. If you read the charter of the BBC, it's there. Along with the public broadcasting systems in Thailand, as well as in other countries. So that's what's common here. You need to have freedom from interference. So in the case of government media, which is the focus of our discussion, this is about the Duterte media agenda after all, editorial independence here refers to freedom from interference from the government. Of course, you would ask, sir, paano po mangyayari yun? Ang nagpupondo po ng government media, yung gobyerno. Siyempre dapat nakikialam siya. Actually, if you look at models in other countries, yes, there are government media, state media, to be specific, that are funded by government, but as far as management and control are concerned, these are left off to the private sector or not to non-government individuals. Okay, because when we say private sector, you might think corporations. No, far from it. For example, in the US, you have a public broadcasting system, and that would give rise to shows like Sesame Street. Familiar pa ba kayo sa Sesame Street? Yes. Okay? Okay, good. So, it gives rise to programs like Sesame Street that may not earn more ratings compared to reality shows, but it is still necessary because it is good for a child's education, right? So through a public broadcasting system, there is opportunity to fund shows like that, okay, with no commercial gain, but still you're able to provide a service to people. Do you get what I mean? So the purpose of a public broadcasting system is to produce alternative programs that are needed by people free from the clutches of commercialism. In other words, you don't think about advertising revenues. You don't think of marketing. Because it all boils down to funding from government, but you do things independently. So, freedom from government interference, and then with regard to journalism, organizational management and journalistic content should be done not by government officials but by individuals. In the British broadcasting system, it's like that. The board of directors are not really government officials, or in cases where they are part of the parliament, there is clear disclosure as to whatever potential conflict of interest they may have. If you visit the website of BBC, the disclosure is so detailed that even members of the House of Lords who sit in the board of directors of the BBC would disclose how much gifts they got during their birthdays, during Christmas, and other occasions, because they need to have that kind of disclosure. Conflicts of interest even. A House of Lords would say that, oh, I sit in this board of directors, I belong to this organization, and so on and so forth. But the bottom line in the BBC is, government is a minority as far as control is concerned. Do you get what I mean? So that's how it is. That's the system that's done in other countries. But here, again, without preempting the discussion in the next few slides, the opposite is true. Government wants absolute control of their government media. So for now, since we want to focus on government media, let's try to analyze what these are. So there are several actually. So I'm not sure if you're familiar with this, but there is such a thing as a tabloid called Mula sa Masa, Para sa Masa. Is it independent? Try to guess. The description, that's why it's put in quotation marks according to the brochure, is it features accomplishments, projects, and services of the government. So even in the brochure of the PCOO, there is no pretension of, being editorially independent, of this tabloid being editorially independent, because it all boils down to what accomplishments government has. Okay? And by accomplishments, I'm sure we don't mean here the number of those killed in the drug war. Right? We're talking here of, alleged government projects that have benefited this much people, etc., etc. So that kind of accomplishments, anything that is what? Positive. So this all boils down to the joke in the newsroom right now. I hope some of the friends in the media wouldn't mind. But in the newsroom, chichismis ko lang, they are very allergic when it comes to press releases. You know why? Because for them, a press release is actually called a praise release. You know what praise is, right? All praises with regard to what a certain organization or a certain individual is doing. It's just like a PUP graduate who is so happy that he or she finally finished 4 years of education, but your parents are much happier and they put a tarpaulin, at your gate. Okay? Minsan iisipin, ay, patay na pala siya. Ay, graduate pala. Right? So, I'm sorry for offending the sensibilities of some students here, but, tarpaulins are better off recycled, okay? And it's better off written with, well-meaning causes instead of congratulations. Okay? Tsaka baka mapagkamalan kayong nakatay na, di ba? So, mahirap naman yun. Yeah, exactly. May ribbon pa, may kalapati pa, di ba? Ayun, puting kalapati, etc. So, yeah, thank you, ma'am. So, that kind of praise. Okay, why did I mention tarpaulins, congratulatory tarpaulins? Ito, parang congratulatory tabloid. You get what I mean? And it is far from being editorially independent. It's similar to RTV Malacanang. It is described as the President's telejournal, and its purpose is to report the activities of the President. So again, no pretension there, and it is taken directly from the brochure. Let me be clear here. These are not my words. These are all in quotation marks because I directly quoted from the brochure of the PCOO. The same with the PIA. It's a government bureau that is in charge of what? Disseminating information on ground from the government to the grassroots level. So notice the hierarchy or the level of description. In this case, what you would notice here is there is some attempt to be objective because in the PIA's description, there is no mention of accomplishments, there is no mention of the President's activities. So, to some extent, you would say, okay, there is some promise to the PIA in terms of how it is described because probably it could be subjected to editorial independence. Okay, let's see. Okay, keep that in mind and then let's see as we go along. Next. The same is true with PTV, the People's Television Network. I'm sure you're familiar with this. This is Channel 4. Din, Edna and I were in Korea before, and one thing about Koreans, the number 4 signifies something. That's why when you go to Korea, and Edna knows this, Dr. Bernabe knows this, first name basis na kami. Okay, she's familiar with this. In any elevator in Korea, there is no 4th floor. 1, 2, 3, 5, 6, 7. But there is a 13th floor, which is quite the opposite here. Dito, may 4th floor, pero dito, after 12, 14 na kagad, di ba? So more or less, you get the idea of what number 4 means in Korea. Because it is close to the symbol of death, kamatayan. So that's why for the more suspicious Koreans, superstitious Koreans, for the more superstitious Koreans, you would be worried of the number 4. Actually, I had the opportunity to teach also in Korea for 1 year. And some students don't like to be in the sequence of the class list as number 4. Eh minsan wala kang magawa. Eh baka magkamali ka ng pagbilang, di ba? Pero umiiwas sila, sir, ayoko po sa number 4. Okay? I don't know why. But of course, you would suspect. So a while ago, I said that Koreans are superstitious. But here, we cannot help but be suspicious also. As to why, up to now, Channel 4 is still Channel 4. Right? But anyway, siguro Channel 13 sa susunod, no? Which, by the way, there is also a Channel 13 still, right? It's called IBC. Although it is not listed in our government media, but there is a stake in IBC as far as the government is concerned. Parang Channel 19 po yan. Of course, you would wonder, at first, sasabihin nyo, it's now CNN Philippines operated by 9 Media Corporation, right? But Channel 9 itself, RPN 9 still exists, okay? And government has a 20% stake in it, okay? So it is now semi-privatized, if you may, along with IBC. So you also have Salam Digital TV, which was introduced during the 2016 State of the Nation address. This is said to be the first Muslim-oriented television channel. Now, wala na pong radyo ng bayan. Okay? It has now been renamed as RP or Radyo Pilipinas. But basically, when you think about it, it's still the same banana. Nagpalit lang ng pangalan. You have 4 radio stations. One is DZRB. Hindi pa pinapalitan yung letter B. I don't know. Well, at any rate, it is said to be the vital link, ginamit ko yung salita sa PCOO, between the government and the people. DZRM, RM stands for Radio Magazine. Okay, so basically, these are supposed to be infomercials and public affairs programs. So, RP3, Sports Radio, 918, so it's about sports. And you have DZRP, which is for OFW. So, I guess Radio Pilipinas would be DZRP. But they retain this one. But anyway, and believe it or not, okay, and this is something that I just learned very early on, okay, in 2016, may FM pala ang gobyerno. Okay? So, they play the hottest music for 87.5. So, when you say hottest music, I suppose this would be what? Pop songs, you know, the usual, Nickelback, Justin Bieber, Dua Lipa, Rebecca Black, no? Okay. Exactly. And then 104.3, ito yung para sa mga medyo may edad na because these are said to be throwback tunes. The so-called oldies but goodies. Paul Anka, The Platters, basta yung mga hindi nyo kilala. Yeah, Tom Jones, Cascades, and kung ano pa. Okay? So, last but not the least, we have here the controversial Philippine News Agency. Now, the description is it's an official news agency. As we'll talk about later, there are efforts to also subject it to editorial independence, and we'll give you more of that later on. Next. So, what do we mean by the Duterte Media Agenda? So, it's quite simple. It's all about Duterte having a clear policy as to the direction of the Philippine media system. So, this is not to be confused with the agenda setting theory as articulated by McCombs and Shaw, where there are 3 agendas, right? So, public agenda, policy agenda, and media agenda. So, agenda setting theory has nothing to do with it. I use the phrase media agenda to just simply try to provide for the environment that is existing right now in the media. So, for example, right now we have repressive media laws, like the Cybercrime Act of 2012, you have the Human Security Act of 2007, and to some extent, you even have the Campus Journalism Act of 1991. So, at first glance, these 3 laws may be good for the country because who would be against cybercrime, right? We are all against child pornography, right? But the movement right now to decriminalize libel has been compromised by the Cybercrime Prevention Act because it even increased the penalty for cyber libel. But journalists and media groups have been pushing for decriminalizing libel in such a way that if you get convicted of libel, when you go to jail, hopefully not with decriminalization, you will just pay a fine. But right now, it's different. You can be in prison for libel. And I'm sure you're aware, we have so many onion-skin politicians that even objective reportage becomes what? Subject to charges of libel. Even the more honorable and the more, authoritative and credible journalists are charged with libel, even if what they're doing is just simply fair commentary. Maraming pikon sa mundong ibabaw. Right? And many of them are in government, unfortunately. So, during that time, 2 years ago, I wrote that all the presidential candidates have miserably failed to present a media agenda. So we cannot ascertain, as 2 years ago, if Duterte would end up repressing the media as his policy pronouncements are lacking at that time. Okay? So fast forward to 2018, what's happening? So the repressive media-related laws remain. Okay? I'm sorry, I may have glossed over the Campus Journalism Act because I mentioned a while ago that it's repressive. Why is it repressive? Presto knows the answer, but I'll try my best to give a very brief answer here. It is repressive because instead of promoting campus press freedom, it has been used by some school, not all, but some school administrators to justify the withholding of funds, to justify the interference with regard to editorial content. I should not be mentioning this, but I was a judge at various times to various campus journalism contests where we get to review the publications of schools nationwide at the elementary and high school level. You will be surprised, even at the high school level, there are campus publications that run columns written by principals. It's as if some principals think that they're still students or they look like students. Maybe they feel like that. But what these columns contain would be what? Praise releases. They praise their administration, for taking care of the students, right? For cleaning up the bathroom or the toilet, etc. Well, nothing wrong with that, except that you don't do that in a campus publication. You do that in your bulletin board or in your own official publication. As I said, the theme song in editorial independence is let it go. If you are a school administrator, you have to trust the students enough to let them be. And if they need guidance, it should just be technical guidance in terms of what? Correct grammar, proper layout, language, etc., etc. But with regard to the topics, you should let the students be decisive in terms of what to report because as a student, they know what issues are closest to their hearts, right? And there is a certain level of maturity when you become a campus journalist. You would learn the difference between what the students need and what the students want. If you run a survey of, let's say, PUP students right now, maybe they would prefer that the Catalyst would publish a music review of Dua Lipa. Maybe. But does it mean that if majority of the students want that, then the campus journalists will take heed of that amidst the national situation or amidst the situation here in school? Okay? So for example, between Dua Lipa and free education, I think the topic that would most likely be useful to students is clear, right? It should be Dua Lipa. Huh? Okay. No, I'm kidding, okay? I'm just checking if you're still pretending to listen to me. But of course, it's free education. Because, why? UP and PUP have something in common. We're now both free in terms of education, in terms of tuition, right? But, the question is, how sustainable is it? From our own computations at UP Diliman, you need 658 million to make sure for 1 year to make sure that all students could be able to maximize free education, okay, in the strictest sense of the term, inclusive of cost of living allowance, which is a very conservative estimate still, but 658 million could work. For PUP, probably it could be more based on the population, because you always outnumber us, right? In terms of population, it could be more. So, those things would have to be talked about in the campus publication, right? And it needs to be analyzed in depth. So what is the solution to in-depth analysis? Do you say that the principal and the faculty member should be the one to write the article? Of course not. But sometimes, there are those who think along that line. There are government officials who think that as students, you are better off just simply studying and not, articulating your sentiments. Which should not be the case, because part of editorial independence here, which is the topic, which is the subject of our discussion, is to operate on the assumption that the citizens know what they want, number one, and number two, the principle of in loco parenti, as far as the state is concerned, should not extend to the government media. Because the government media would end up as just simply a propaganda machine of the government, which is unacceptable. Because government media always claims to uphold the highest standards of journalism, most especially the PNA. It has a rich tradition of being independent before. But then when it was taken over by the Marcoses, then it took on a different turn. So that's the most unfortunate thing right now. Foreign ownership of media is also being pushed. So I took the liberty of taking a screenshot of RBH number 8, which was filed on August 2, 2016. Basahin lang natin para dun sa mga nasa likod, baka hindi nakikita ng mabuti. The ownership and management of mass media shall be limited to citizens of the Philippines or to corporations, cooperatives, or associations fully owned and managed by such citizens. So at first, you may argue, sir, wala namang problema diyan kasi 100% dapat Filipino-owned yung mass media. Right? But the keyword here is this: unless otherwise provided by a federal law. So under federalism, that is what they want. So if there is a law that would negate 100% Filipino ownership, it becomes what? It becomes constitutional already. Because in English, you don't need to be a lawyer to interpret this, because you only need to make the distinction between an adjectival clause and a restrictive clause. Adjectival only describes the whole point of the sentence. So parang adjective siya. Yung parang beautiful person, right? It's just an adjective. But here, it is restrictive clause. There is a clear proviso of foreign ownership if it will be provided for by federal law. So that's the kind of media environment that we're in right now. Reminiscent of the time of then-President Joseph Estrada, who in 1999 said words to the effect that mass media should be foreign-owned. Actually, Estrada was much worse because he also said that foreigners should be allowed to own land. Okay, at around that time. So land and media can be foreign-owned. That was the proposal then, and that's why it was met by stiff resistance from various groups and individuals. You also see harassment and intimidation of critical journalists and news media organizations. So Rappler is here right now, and I'm sure they know what I mean by harassment and intimidation. Revocation of SEC license, tax evasion, cybercrime law, cyber libel, among others. So it has been subjected to that. I think the same case applies to the proposal regarding ABS-CBN, because they were proposing an extension of their franchise, but even up to now, we don't know what's gonna happen to the franchise of ABS-CBN. When does the franchise of ABS-CBN expire? In 2020. So 2 years from now. So kapag hindi na rin yung ang franchise, ano ibig sabihin nun? Mawawala na ng Channel 2.